will be brought to the floor next week. Now, while it now looks like it will pass the House, it faces an uphill battle in the Senate. On social media yesterday, President Trump called out Republicans who are backing the bill, saying any lawmaker on the right supporting it was very bad or stupid, and stressed there should be no deflection to Epstein. Now, another sign of unease in the Trump White House on this matter, administration officials met with Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado yesterday in an effort to convince her not to vote for the Epstein petition. That meeting, it even took place in the White House Situation Room, according to a West Wing official and a source close to Boebert who spoke to MSNBC. Sources say that FBI Director Kash Patel was present at the meeting. Trump was not there, but spoke to Boebert over the phone the day before. She is one of just 4 Republicans who signed on to the petition, along with Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, and Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina.
And as MSNBC reports, Boebert is not the only signer the president has tried to persuade. According to a source, Congresswoman Mace has been playing phone tag with Trump. Now, the Democratic leader of the petition, Congressman Ro Khanna of California.
White House's attempts to stop his bill.
They brought her, as you pointed out, into the Situation Room, where they plan things like the bin Laden raid. And here they are pressuring Lauren Boebert to get off. They did the same with Nancy Mace. But they held, when Massie and my bill comes to the floor next week, which even the speaker now is saying that it will come, you're going to see 50, 60, maybe even more Republicans vote against him. That is a huge deal, not because of the work Massie and I are doing, because people are sensing the weakness of Donald Trump to be willing to cast that vote against him.
In just a few moments, we'll speak to another member of the House Oversight Committee. But first, let's bring in opinion writer at the New York Times, Mara Gay, MSNBC Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend, Jackie Alavany, and politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin. J-Mart, we'll begin with you. Let's go big picture. This is simply the story that Donald Trump can't kill, despite his best efforts. This is continuing to get headlines. There are Republicans who are continuing to defy him. That in itself.
Rare and noteworthy. And there's no question here that the White House is worried.
Testing.
Because, as I just read,
hopefully y'all can hear me.
The things they've tried to do to stop this story, that's simply not the behavior from someone who has nothing to hide.
Yeah, it's the first issue that I can think of that kind of fractures Trump's base and does indicate that there actually is an element of Trump's base that is more invested in a school of thought, in a worldview, and a perspective. Now, granted, the perspective is sort of leans toward the conspiratorial thinking, John, but if you look at the roster of folks who have signed on this petition, it's not like the Mod Squad from the Northeast who typically are up for grabs voters. They're all pretty far right, kind of MAGA or MAGA adjacent people from Red America, which tells me that this is a grassroots-driven issue, that this is a voter-driven issue. And it's also, John, I think it's a reminder that Trump was always an imperfect vessel for an outsider insurgent candidacy, right? I mean, the person taking on the deep state is listed throughout the Epstein emails as having a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He went to Bill and Hillary Clinton went to his wedding. He's hardly somebody who was taking on the estate, wasn't very much part of the establishment. Some of his folks would say the deep state. I think, John, when the historians look at this down the road, it's going to be fascinating that Trump was the avatar for the great anti-establishment wave of the early 21st century, given who he is.
Yeah, and it's always such a curious choice that it was members of his base that really grabbed the Epstein conspiracy theories, thinking, I guess, that they thought it would bring down Democrats or institutions of power, when instead Trump himself is just so enmeshed in Epstein's world. Jackie, I mean, let's go to you next for the state of play here. It's so interesting, as just noted, some Republicans defied Trump and, rebuked his efforts to dissuade them from not signing on to this. So talk to us about just the feeling within the House, but more than that, talk about the upper chamber, because another vote now looms. Is there a sense that enough Republicans will, again, be willing to say no to Trump to put this material out there?
Yeah, Jonathan, well, I want to start with what you and J. Mart was just talking about, because this is exactly what happens when you look at this handful of MAGA adherents and loyalists who rebuked Trump for the first time on an issue that has plagued his presidency. We have to look back to 2017, 2016, 2015, where this wave of political candidates, political aspirants, people who got involved in politics for the first time on the heels of QAnon, because they were QAnon conspiracy theorists. They were living in those QAnon chat rooms.
And it led them to politics. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the first candidates who actually came to office and started to dabble in politics because of her QAnon beliefs, at least at that time. I'm not sure where she stands on that now, especially with this Marjorie Taylor Greene makeover. But QAnon obviously co-opted a lot of the sex trafficking traffic that was going on the internet. And so this has always been a huge issue for people like Thomas Massie, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who have welcomed conspiracy theorists and fringe Republicans and conservatives into their coalition. And it's how they have been able to accumulate so much power and especially so much online influence. So it is not a surprise here that this was the hill that they were going to die on. And as J. Mart said, this is the biggest issue that has caused the most inter-party discontent for Donald Trump. Polling that was done in July showed that 40% of people approved of the way the president was handling this, according to the New York Times, but that 36% disapproved it, which is a big number for Trump at this point. And that is polling that has not been updated since a handful of news cycles drawing Trump closer and closer to the Epstein files and placing him right in the center of it have been released. But now when it comes to the actual sort of nuts and bolts of what's going on here, Mike Johnson's going to bring this to the floor next week for a vote. I think Thomas Massie is very right that once this actually gets on the floor, you're going to see more Republicans break with Trump, because this is going to be a very hard vote for them to take, no matter how much they're in support of the president, because this is something that Republican voters, again, it's the only thing that is more popular than Trump. But when it gets to the Senate, that's still a wild card. We know that there's two lawmakers, Rand Paul and Josh Hawley, who have already previously signed on with Democrats in favor of transparency to release all these files. I imagine there's going to be more. I don't know if there's going to be enough to get to 60 to release it. But again, I was talking to a number of MAGA allies and just true believers yesterday who said this is an issue that is ruining Donald Trump's presidency.
And Mara, to that point, this is a vote where if you vote to side with Trump, what you're basically saying is, I'm voting against releasing the information about a convicted pedophile. Like, that is just an extraordinary step to ask someone to take. So maybe Congressman Massie is right that more Republicans simply won't want to go there because of their base or just even their conscience. They don't want that to happen. So to that, let's pick up on that last point. With that as the backdrop, just the unseemliness and ugliness of this whole story, it does feel like it's dragging Trump down in a moment when he was already, for the first time in this presidency, taking on water, right? The elections lose, the Republicans lose the elections, the affordability crisis is everywhere, bad headlines with the White House. Add to the list, and it feels like this is now something that just adds to a real moment of struggle.
Well, it's fascinating because this is the only issue we've seen so far where Republicans who are not Donald Trump seem to be aware that they actually have political capital in their own voters to rival the president. Every other issue, they've been terrified to oppose him because of the relationship that Donald Trump has with that base. And Donald Trump's extraordinary measures, as you said, to keep these files private really suggest, especially, let's pull back, it is unbelievable what he has survived politically in this country for the past 10 years. The fact that this is the issue, that he clearly has an instinct is at the heart of something that animates his base and is potentially at the heart of the relationship he has with this base. I think he's terrified that this is going to unravel. It really raises kind of the question of whether many Americans were attracted to Donald Trump because they saw him as, again, we know, such an outsider and somebody who was going to clean up that swamp and make government something you could trust again. And this issue with the Epstein files seems to be at the heart of that relationship. And I think he's really afraid that it's going to unravel at a moment when, beyond that base, things are not looking good for him politically. Also, there's the government shutdown that, by the way, 1 in 8 Americans rely on SNAP benefits. People can't afford to buy homes, to rent homes. I mean, this is a crisis that he can't seem to dig his way out of. And, also the sign that the Republicans are sending is they smell blood. And I think they may be ready to coalesce around maybe taking back some power and showing some independence from this White House. And that has got to make Donald Trump nervous in and of itself.
Republicans so rarely do that, and they're so rarely willing to defy Trump. But there's no question this is a low moment for him in this second term. Joining us now, a member of the Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. He's also a candidate for the U.S. Senate there in that state. Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's start with what came out yesterday, the emails that the House Oversight Democrats put out, but then later this flood from Republicans, which seemingly was intended to distract, but frankly, some of those emails didn't look all that great for President Trump either. So just what do you think, in your estimation, what did the American public learn yesterday?
Well, I think what they learned is that I think Donald Trump knows a lot more than what he's letting on. And I think the one email that really stands out is where Epstein says that Donald Trump, quote unquote, knew about the girls. OK, that is obviously directly opposite of what Donald Trump has claimed in terms of zero knowledge of what Jeffrey Epstein did. But just to level set, I think the one thing that I would just say, which is really providing the backdrop to what we're seeing right now, are the survivors and the victims. I met with them along with many members of the Oversight Committee. We met with them for 2.5 hours. It was some of the most gut-wrenching conversations I've ever had in Congress. And many of these people have no knowledge of the files, even documenting their own trauma because they lost memory of it. There were more than 1,000 victims. These are children who have yet to receive any justice after 2 decades of being traumatized. And so for their sake, but also to prevent this from ever happening again, we got to get to the bottom of what happened and get those files.
So, Congressman, that was my next question is, obviously, you don't know particulars. We haven't seen them yet. But what is, even in broad strokes, your understanding of what still is out there? What is the material that could be released were the House and Senate to vote for it?
I think there's a lot. Obviously, there's photographs, there's documents about financial transactions. I think that particular category itself is a tremendous trove of information that we need to get access to. Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon, and financial institutions confirmed that there were more than $1 billion in transactions associated with this child sex trafficking ring. So knowing who paid whom and following the money will be very important for really getting to the bottom of what happened.
And Congressman, I'm wondering if you can pull at a thread for me here that I've been thinking a lot about when covering this story this week, especially on the heels of a shutdown when our growing income inequality has been in such stark relief. The thing about this story that really stands out to me is this continued pattern of there being a billionaire class and that class being protected and favored by Donald Trump, the story of have and have-nots. I mean, when you listen to these women who go on MSNBC and share their stories across media outlets and talk about what this has done to them, I mean, it really sets, I think, the scene for just the power disparity here. And I think we're seeing that consistently in a lot of different ways across this administration when it comes to recent policies and actions taken by the president. I mean, how do you see it?
100%. I think there are two systems of criminal justice. In this particular case, rich and powerful men who abused literally thousands of children and young girls have now escaped accountability for more than 2 decades, whereas other people are routinely, prosecuted and sentenced per our laws and rules and regulations. And so there are two justice systems. George Santos gets a pardon, whereas other people, languish in our prisons and don't necessarily get the same measure of leniency that someone like he does. So we are in that kind of system of unfairness right now.
Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois. Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So, J. Mart, back to you. This is the story that just won't die for President Trump. And look, anyone trying to make predictions in this era ends up being rendered foolish more times than not. But just, D.C., you're talking to lawmakers, you're talking to Republicans. How are they seeing these potentially next week or two play out? How worried are they that this story is just going to keep on snowballing? And look, I'm not suggesting it's going to eclipse affordability. Like, that's what voters really care about. But it's the kind of thing that just bogs down a party and a presidency.
Well, look, presidents have challenges in second terms, John. You know that. And this is President Trump's second term. It's obviously the first 10 months of the new administration, but it's really his second term because of how familiar he is on the political landscape and because the nature of the challenges he's facing. And also, John, because of his choices. He immediately has tried to become a foreign policy president, chasing a legacy in the first months of his second term. And I think the frustration among his colleagues, his allies on the Hill, is the Epstein thing divides their base and is a nuisance. I think the bigger frustration is this president is focused entirely on himself and his interest, whether it's the White House renovation or whether it's chasing a Nobel Peace Prize at the expense of them. They're the ones on the ballot next year. He will never be on a ballot again. And you mentioned the affordability issue. That's really a stand-in, I think, for just Trump taking his eye off the ball. And I think for a lot of voters, they said, I gave this guy a shot to come back in because I'm paying too much with Biden. Maybe he can lower prices. And not only hasn't he done it, he doesn't show any interest in addressing it, John. And I'm really fascinated. Do we see Trump out there more campaigning, talking about this issue? I tend to be skeptical because I'm just not sure he's interested in that. But he did the Laura Ingraham interview 2 nights ago, and he's talking to her about his blueprint for the OEOB, the Old Executive Office Building renovation. What does that have to do with a guy in Saginaw, Michigan who's trying to pay the bills, right? So I think the deeper frustration is, will this president focus again on the issue at hand, the cost of living, or is this all about him and his legacy in term 2? I think it's pretty clear what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, he's done next to no domestic travel to help out Republicans to this point in his term. To your point, J. Mart, he seems consumed only with thoughts of himself. Senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin.
Coming up next year on Morning Joe.
Okay, now time for me to talk. There's 40 million Americans without food, including me. I'm disabled. I have a heart the size of a grapefruit. Look, I'm afraid to do this podcast right now because I'm on Social Security. I get food benefits. I'm disabled. You all just want to make fun of me like I'm a good-for-nothing lazy bum. Listen, I enjoyed working more than this shit, okay? When I was working, I made a fucking really nice income working for a big pharmaceutical company, and I looked at it as trying to help save lives and protect the rainforest. And I had a really good career doing database management. My heart is swollen the size of a grapefruit. I get tired just walking into the other room. I've got to sleep all the fucking time. I can't even really play video games anymore because, like, 20 minutes into the game, I'm, like, asleep and shit. I've got a heart of a fucking 90-year-old man, okay? But I would much rather work. When I was working, I would go to fucking every concert. I would go on vacations. Now I'm stuck fucking home all the time getting made fun of. It sucks, okay? But I'm very, very grateful to the United States of America. I fucking love America. I think Social Security is a wonderful program. SNAP is a wonderful program. Donald Trump doesn't understand any of this. He doesn't understand the importance of sending poor people to college. Like, for example, Bernie Sanders said, hey, let's tax the rich 3% and send everyone to college. And they don't understand. They see that as giving away our hard-earned money versus, helping others. And these are the Christians that don't want to help others. Feeding people with SNAP benefits is the most basic Christian tenet. I thought these people were supposed to be Christians. But to even ask the Supreme Court to stop food benefits, it shows you how much Donald Trump cares about the 4 million children, 10 million children who are on food benefits, and the 4 million disabled that he doesn't give one fuck. He's holding a synchronized swimming fucking party, and there's like weird Russian oligarchs hugging fucking girls in bikinis, and I'm like, the fucking White House is soon going to become a straight-up Epstein brothel. He thinks he can get away with all this shit. So, yeah, I'm horrified. They could, sue me. I don't have a fucking lawyer. So here, I hope you guys protect me and fucking, I trust the freedom of speech. I love America. But he's going to turn it into fucking North Korea or fucking Mother Russia, where they're going to knock on my door for doing this podcast, for watching NBC News. Your words like pedophile, Nazi, if you say, I just said, I think Trump might be guilty of being friends with Epstein, and they banned me from TikTok instantly. And I appealed it, they let me back on. Because what I said was very tame. Trump and Epstein, best friends. And that's all I did, is whatever fucking Epstein said. He said I was best friends with Donald Trump. But when I said, oh, ban, don't say that, because it's a communist app in league with Donald, and they fucking oppress everyone. YouTube paid $28 million fucking dollars. So, I'm a little afraid in the United States of America. I'm a little afraid to podcast. And all you have to do, all this stuff is all out in the open. All you have to do is follow the snail trail of John Casablancas, Trump's associates. John Casablancas left his wife for a 15-year-old, and that was Trump's other associate. However, whatever it was, friend, associate, didn't even know the guy, whatever. Epstein, Tate, birds of a feather, raping together. Why is he getting Tate released from Romania, the guy who's in Romania for sex trafficking crimes? Okay, and then Vladimir Putin, another guy, he likes 500,000 women from the Ukraine stolen. This is a pattern that's so obvious. He said on Hollywood Tonight that there was a 10-year-old walking up the stairs, and he's like, oh, I wish I could hit that. Ooh. The Howard Stern show, he bragged about this walking backstage. These are backstage beauty pageants of indiscriminate agents. And then the Republicans think, oh, you have cognitive. So wait, you just don't like him. Someone said to me, oh, you just don't like wealthy people because you're on Social Security, so you don't like half of my friends are wealthy. Okay, that's nothing to do with that. It's because he's an actual rapist. Maybe it's true. Why are you looking for all these excuses why you don't like him? I don't just randomly hate wealthy people. I think Mark Cuban is super cool, dude. Okay, let's go back to the news.
As the government reopens and after the White House is indicating the key economic data that was delayed might not ever be released. Let's bring in the co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box and the New York Times columnist, Andrew Ross Sorkin. Andrew, that sure raised a lot of eyebrows when the press secretary said yesterday that, hey, that data just may never come out. You tell us more about what you know, because certainly some in Washington were like, well, must have been really bad that they don't want us to see it.
Well, look, I think the conundrum here is we don't know. And we don't know what the numbers would have been. I think there was clearly problems in even collecting the data, and that seems to be why we're in this situation. Having said that, it undermines the credibility of the data when eventually we get whatever data we do get, even if that's effectively next month's data. For the most part, The problem has been that the Federal Reserve, as well as investors across the country and the world, have been relying on all sorts of third-party data. Now, the truth is maybe some of that data is perhaps even considered more credible. However, over time, the data that's been considered the most credible has been government data. Now, the problem is now, because of this situation, the government shutdown, and also the shifts in terms of personnel at the Bureau of Labor, the BLS, there has been real questions about what kind of data we're going to get and whether that data is going to be believed. So the next time we hear real numbers from the government, I'm afraid to say there are going to be people who are going to question it. And that unto itself is going to be a real challenge.
I completely agree. We know hard, reliable data, that kind of certainty, so important to the markets, to our economy writ large, that now in question. Andrew, the president last night at the White House hosted a number of CEOs for dinner, his latest efforts to court big business. Tell us more about what we know.
Well, what was so interesting about this dinner is, unlike previous dinners like this and other kinds of events with the CEO class, especially the big tech CEOs, there was always pool sprays. They were always public to a large degree. They were shows of force by the president to, proximity is power kind of thing. This was actually quite different, and maybe different because the kinds of CEOs, mostly Wall Street bankers who've had maybe a more complicated relationship with this president, were not public. I mean, this was an off-the-record dinner, if you will. So I think it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of days what comes out of this in terms of what we actually learn really took place.
I think that may be part of why there was no media access last night. I think the other part is they didn't want the press pool in there shouting questions about the Jeffrey Epstein emails. The